And now I'm joined by the Reverend Ben Johnson. He is the senior editor of the Religion and Liberty Transatlantic site for the Acton Institute, a terrific commentator, and he has, I think, been roused like a proverbial giant this week to write something very compelling about satanic capitalism. So first of all, Father, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So you've written this piece, you wrote it for your own Acton website. It was reprinted by The Stream, which is another great site. It addresses the possibility that satanic capitalism, democracy, freedom, modern political orders, such as we have here in the United States, could be to blame for abortion, and particularly the abortion referendum in Ireland. That sounds very off to me, and I think you agree. Could you explain what's going on here?
Sure. The entire row began with an article that was published in the UK Catholic Herald by Matthew Schmitz, who's senior editor over at First Things. He wrote an article about the referendum, which of course carried 2-1 in Ireland to repeal the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, which had protected life and recognized the right to life that was given by God. He said that this referendum had been caused in large part by capitalism and democracy. He said that these things were to blame. So Schmitz, by the way, describes himself as a socialist Roman Catholic. That's his self-description, which is a contradiction in terms according to Catholic magisterium. Of course, Pope Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno wrote that Christian socialism is a contradictory term. No one can be at the same time a good Catholic and a true socialist. So that idea in itself is self-contradictory. But it gives us an idea, I feel it's unintentionally revelatory about where he's coming from. He said that the Irish people have been dazzled by economic success because they were concerned with efficiency. He says, by valorizing efficiency, capitalism tempts us to view certain lives as useless. By elevating procedure, democracy encourages indifference to ultimate ends. So when you have a cult of superficial procedural legality without reference to fundamental moral law, the stage is set for a war of the powerful against the weak. And he concludes this by saying, when this occurs, the spirit of democratic capitalism turns out to be satanic. Now, that phrase, the spirit of democratic capitalism, of course, harkens back to Michael Novak and his book from 1982 by that name, The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, which was influential, had a large influence in Centesimus Annus and in the thought of Pope John Paul II, that capitalism and Catholicism were in no means mutually exclusive ideologies or processes.
Now, I think a lot of this, though, is I've been very familiar with people who think like Schmitz, and I've met Schmitz, and there's a new current, isn't there, of this kind of thought in intellectual circles, particularly among young intellectual Catholics. I've been around it quite a bit, and I find it pretty disturbing, personally, because it does tend to see as alarming things that I think of as actually better alternatives than what's most alarming in the modern world, which is liberal morally, and then secondly also authoritarian by means. You see, they look at the liberalism that tends to crop up in economically free societies, and they say that should be fought with means that might actually kind of flirt with authoritarianism. That worries me. What do you think of that?
I think that you're spot on when it comes to that. I think that the fundamental error of Schmitz, and I'm sure he's a perfectly fine gentleman. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him. I would like to do so in a cordial manner if that ever comes about. But I think that Schmitz's fundamental error is that he's confusing the process of the free market and capitalism for the culture that it happens to operate in. So both of these things are procedures. When it comes to capitalism, it's an economic procedure. I prefer to use the term free market. Capitalism has a lot of baggage to it. What we've practiced for the last 70 years in the West isn't really capitalism. It's sort of a hybrid system of state regulation, in some cases outright state ownership, but heavy federal regulation, which often makes the system work less efficiently than it should otherwise. People reject that and then decide they should go full bore for nothing but state regulation and state ownership, as you were saying. But capitalism it's a procedure. It's the way that people make decisions about the things that they wish to buy and the way that those things are allocated, how much they cost. In democracy is the way that power is allocated. And both of them have the absolute maximum freedom for the individual. Pope John Paul II said we were created for liberty. That was what mankind was created for freedom, is his phrase from Centesimus Annus. So that's what we were created for. And socialism and its attendant political system, authoritarianism, denies that at its very core. Capitalism and democracy essentially democratize decision-making, give the absolute amount of perfect freedom to all, and Socialism restricts those decisions to the very few, to the Politburo or to the regulators who happen to be in charge of that. When it's been done, by the way, we have to remember when it comes to the actual history of this, it was the Soviet Union that first legalized abortion for any reason. So socialist countries were always in the forefront of legalizing abortion. It was not the free market that put this over. And in the most developed capitalist nations, the United States and Canada, abortion on demand had to be ushered in undemocratically by the Supreme Courts in those countries. It was not a decision of the people. So
that's very important.
Yeah. So if democracy and capitalism was, has corrupted us into supporting abortion, that's a curious example, I would think.
Right. And there's another element in here that I think is really important. When it comes to societies that are, well, I should say, when it comes to states that are socialized, when it comes to social states, a problem arises that really gets immediately to what Schmitz accuses capitalist societies of getting to. You know our mutual friend Marcin, the Polish graduate student. He's written for you and for me.
Yes, Marcin Rezagowski.
Yeah, I have no idea how to pronounce his name. There was a pope who was from Poland, and nobody knows how to pronounce his name, no matter how famous he got. But so I had him on recently, not the pope, the graduate student,
that would have been,
and we were talking about abortion debates in Poland. Well, one of the major problems they're having in Poland is that despite pro-life efforts to further restrict abortion and give even more protection to unborn children with disabilities, the rhetorical answer from their government tends to be, oh, well, that will be expensive because we're a socialized state. So if a sick person comes into this world, it's inevitable that the collective must care for that individual rather than the family, rather than the town, rather than the individual himself. And therefore, since it's the collective responsibility, well, we have to make decisions that are in the best interests efficiently of the common good in a collective scenario, which seems to me far more dangerous and far more conducive to the conclusion that Schmitz decries in capitalism and in Ireland than capitalism itself would be.
Yes, I think socialism disregards the fundamental worth and value and dignity of human nature itself. Pope John Paul II said socialism's primary error is anthropological in nature. He also said socialism considers the individual person simply an element, a molecule within the social organism. Martin Luther King Jr., when he said he rejected communism, said that communism grounds people down to nothing more than a cog in the never-ending wheel of the state. So when people are viewed as resources to be exploited by the state or component parts of their individual economic class, the individual gets lost in the collective, and individuals can be discarded. In fact, entire classes are intended to be wiped out by ideological Marxism. But individuals certainly have no standing there. The collective triumphs over the individual will and the individual good and dignity of the human being, which is the fundamental contribution of Western civilization, that every human being, every human life, however flawed, however guilty, however it's come into this world, has fundamental dignity and value, and that the individual is the highest ranking component of society. So that has to be respected above and beyond all other things. But when you socialize these things and you say, well, individuals are expensive, then they suddenly become dispensable as well.
Amen. That's exactly right. And thank you for your analysis of this. I do want our viewers to be able to take a look at this article. The title of it is Satanic Capitalism. Socialist First Things editor blames free markets for Irish abortion vote. It's really stark stuff, really, really incisive analysis from you, Father. Thank you, and I look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you very much, Stephen.